Welcome to the podcast, Jared Bradley, the president of M-Vac Systems. Thanks for being in the podcast today, Jared.
Oh, it's all my pleasure. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So I was really excited to get you on here. I got a few questions. I'm assuming that we're going to generate more questions as we go through this podcast. So I might hit you with an email and a follow-up. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm just really interested in this technology. First off, I think that it's something that could be one of the biggest game changers in forensics, as far as I know. Although I'm a layman, I'm not trained in forensics. I don't have a forensics background. I've never collected DNA with the purposes of analyzing it or looking for a profile. But from an outsider's perspective, it seems to me that this could be a game changer. And so I guess one of the questions that I usually start with when I'm inquiring about these kind of technologies is, what are the limitations, if you wouldn't mind giving us, about the M-Vac? What can't it do?
What can't it do? Well, that's a great question, Jeff. And first of all, I appreciate you inviting me onto your program. And it's any chance that I have to talk about the M-Vac, man, I'm all over it. So, and to kind of clarify, the M-Vac already is a game changer. You know, there's hundreds of cases around the country and around the world even, where it's already made a difference. And so for those victims, for those particular people, and for that particular case, it made all the difference. And so, you know, just knowing that we're making a difference somewhere is a huge honor, and we just love it. You know, every time we actually get any feedback, which is fairly rare, you know, it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. And so we love it. But to get back to your question, what can't you know, there are places where it's not really, you can't really say not appropriate, but in our training, which I travel quite a bit and do quite a few of these trainings around the country now, when you can visibly see a biological stain, whether it's blood or saliva, you know, semen stain, when you can visibly see it with your naked eye, you don't need the M-Vac. You know, there's so much DNA material there that I like the reference. I say, you know, you could collect it with a spoon and you could still get a good profile. So just understanding that the sensitivity of the lab equipment is so sensitive now that you don't even need the amount of cells that would fit on the head of a pin. It's on the tip of a pin. So you know, the amount of DNA that you actually need to generate a profile is so low. You know, you don't need to get a whole bunch of it. So if you have a blood spatter or a semen stain on a sheet or something like that, you know, there's so much DNA there that you know, it wouldn't matter what you collected with.
Oh, that's a really good way to point that out. I think I noticed that on one of your demos before, that you explained that pretty clearly. I think that's a great place to start. That we're really only looking for nooks and crannies. Is that kind of where we're? And there are different. Not to get too technical or ahead of ourselves, there are different attachments. Say, maybe I should back up a little bit and ask you about the impetus of this technology. I know it was once described as a carpet cleaner type vacuum for DNA. So maybe you could tell us, where did you get the idea from that? And then maybe we'll expand and talk about the different collection tools.
Sure. Well, I wish I could take credit for it, but my dad actually invented the system. So he didn't pass down all of his brains, but you know, I was smart enough to jump on board when he asked me to come on. And back in 2006, and the interesting thing was my dad was a microbiologist. And so I don't know if you remember, in 1993 timeframe, there was an E. coli outbreak in Jack in the Box. Do you remember those hamburgers that were tainted? And this is
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. It killed like 6 kids. It was huge news. Well, that really bothered him. He grew up on a ranch in Idaho. And so, tainted hamburger really bothered him. And plus, that was about the time his first grandchild was born. And so he started evaluating where the process had broken down. And he realized that they have this really sensitive capability kind of on the lab side, but on the front end, the collection was really weak. And statistically speaking, it was equivalent of trying to find, imagine a dime is lost in your house, and you have 5 guesses of where it is, but you're blindfolded. And so you just have to kind of arbitrarily say, well, I think it's here. No, that's wrong. Okay, you missed it. Well, that dime is equivalent of, it could be arsenic, and your kids are gonna, when your kids find it and put it in their mouth, it's gonna kill them. And so that's kind of the game that they play. Now, don't get me wrong, the food industry works really hard to put out good product, but statistically speaking, it's pretty low that they can actually find exactly what they're doing using their current methods. And so that's to get back to the the whole story. When my dad was breaking this down, he was looking at, there's not enough technology and focus on the front end of it. If you don't, it's a garbage in, garbage out thing. If you don't collect it in the very beginning, then everything downstream of that, it doesn't make any use whatsoever. Doesn't matter how good the technology is. So he was kind of looking at it. So, well, if I want to get down into the little nooks and crannies of even a spinach leaf or a beef carcass or something like that, how do you do it? What's the best way to do it? And that's where he came up with the idea of the wet vacuum. If you have a stain in your carpet, you don't hit it with a broom. A washcloth doesn't do a whole lot. And so, the carpet cleaner, that's the most aggressive way. So that's how he came up with the idea. And it took him, I don't know, close to 10 years to develop it. And when he was finally ready to launch it, that's when he brought me on. And then a couple of years later, he got a brain tumor and passed away in less than 10 months. And next thing I knew, I was trying to carry on his legacy, and that's where I've been ever since. So we started in the food industry and realized that within a few years of banging our head against that wall, we realized that they just weren't gonna adopt the technology. And so right around that same time frame is when I ran into a good friend of mine from college who'd gone into the FBI. I'd gone into the military and he'd gone the FBI route. And I was explaining the M-Vac to him in the context of collecting E. coli. And he was like, man, something like that would have been amazing on my crime scenes. So we're like, okay. On occasion, the light bulb goes off. And so we took it down to a lab here in the Salt Lake area and asked them to test it for us. And when they came back, they were like, we've never seen recoveries like this. And by the way, we're going to buy this system. So
wow,
that was our first real introduction into the potential of the forensics industry. And, it took us another year and a half, 2 years after that. Again, being a little hard-headed up here, we finally just reached a point where we're like, the food industry is just never going to adopt this. So we got to figure it out. And we pivoted into forensics in 2012, and that's where we've been ever since.
Sounds great. I mean, I think that story mimics so many other stories I've heard about, the long journey to finding your business or your model or your formula. So I think that resonates with a lot of people, actually. Well, we're glad that you had that friend in the FBI who kind of spoke up to you and said,
right.
Wow, why don't you use this to collect DNA? And so that's just one of those things, one of those moments that you just can't plan for.
Thin threads, man. You just never know who you're going to run into and who can who can say something that'll change your life. So
Couple things
that's a good life. It's a good life lesson. Just, you never discount anybody, because even the guy on the street that you have no idea who he is may say something to you that'll give you an idea or send you in a different direction.
I'm so happy you said that. In the last couple of weeks, I've probably tweeted something along those lines 3 or 4 times, where there really isn't a wrong question. I always said this as an educator. The only stupid question is the question that's never asked.
Mm-hmm.
And I also said, you don't really know where the next answer is going to come from. You might come with a wrong question or a wrong proposition that just doesn't fit, but someone hearing that might spark a curiosity in them that leads them down the road to something else. So I agree with you. We have to be more open to all sorts of inputs, whether them, as you said, some guy on the street or a CEO of a company or a president of a company.
Yeah,
so I really
absolutely.
appreciate those remarks. Yeah, that really lines up with a lot that I've been talking about recently. Can you describe to us maybe what the underlying technology is? How does it actually work? Like, I understand that it sucks up the wet material, or what if it's dry? Does it need to put water or some solution into it and then pull up? So if you could
Sure.
expand on that.
Oh yeah. No, so imagine the handheld attachment that you would put on a carpet cleaner when you're cleaning your couch or the stairs. It's a smaller portion, as opposed to the large vacuum. It's a smaller handheld thing, but it still has the same principles, and that is it sprays the liquid down and then vacuums it up immediately afterwards. And it's kind of that combination of the spray vacuum that is really the magic of the M-Vac. And so it's patterned much like the carpet cleaner concept, but a little bit differently, that most carpet cleaners spray in front of the vacuum, whereas the M-Vac, and this is where all of our patents and all the technology actually is, it actually sprays in the middle of the vacuum. And so the vacuum actually encompasses the spray. So that creates a little, like a mini hurricane down on the surface. And so between the solution impinging on the surface and then the vacuum pressure pulling on it and swirling it around and all the turbulence that's created in there, that allows the DNA material, and it doesn't matter what it is, when you look at like even a skin cell under a microscope, it's very jagged. And so you would think that, a skin cell would be nice and smooth, the way they are when they're healthy. But when they get keratinized and start sloughing off, they're actually pretty jagged. And so they'll stick to clothing and things that the traditional methods like the swabbing can't really collect it as much. But when the M-Vac is used, it sprays between that spray impinging down on it, and it comes out around 15 psi. So it's not, when you spray it up just in the air, it's just like a mist. Mm-hmm. But when it's down on the surface, it's just enough vacuum and it's just enough pressure down there that it helps the cellular material, whatever it is you're looking for, it helps it break off of whatever it's clinging to and then be collected with the vacuum. So when the FBI tested it, it came out an average of 12x bigger or better. But wow. in certain scenarios, it was up to 66 times better. So, wow. Yeah. And it's, when you look at it percentage wise, that's 6,600 times better, or 6,600%. Sorry, getting all my things all screwed up here. But yeah, that even the 12x, that's 1,200% better than what the swab can do. And so that may be the difference between a good profile and a partial or an inconclusive. So it's a major deal, especially when you're talking about cold cases where the DNA might be a little degraded some of the DNA is not viable anymore. And so collecting every single cell that you possibly can oftentimes be the difference in solving a case or not.
Just something that popped in my head while you were talking. What about trying to use it to take it, like maybe from a swab? Like, oh, we have this swab that was used to collect DNA, but that's all we have now. The original source is gone, but we have this swab. Could the M-Vac maybe pull something out of the swab that wouldn't have been able to be transferred normally? Or am I kind of just dreaming here?
No, it'd be a lot more effective just to take the material off of the end of that swab and just go directly into testing with that.
Oh, no. What I'm saying is, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. I guess I'm trying to think, like, how are we going to go back to cold cases and apply this machine to whatever material that is in the, the evidence locker?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, like, how would you pull up? So I guess I was just off the cuff kind of question there. But...
Oh no, it's a great question, and actually it's been tested that way, but it's not very effective at all. It's much more, the fewer times that you have to transfer DNA, because it doesn't matter how effective it is, you're going to lose a little bit. So the fewer times that you have to transfer the DNA from one bottle to another, from the swab to the extraction process, the fewer times that you have to do that, the more effective it is. And so the M-Vac wouldn't be used in that scenario, but when you want to apply it is going to be when you have actual evidence. And there's a lot of times when the swab has already been tried, but you can go back over that same area with the M-Vac, and oftentimes they'll get more DNA material using the M-Vac the second, after the swab, than what the swab originally did. And the FBI, when they tested it, they showed that as well. It was up to 46 times better even after the swabbing. So, a lot of times the swab, the swab's kind of the equivalent of a broom. When you have that stain in the carpet. So the swab is just going to go over the top. So if this is the strands of the carpet, it's just going to go over the top, and it'll get whatever's on the very top, the very closest to the surface of the carpet. But as you can imagine, with the M-Vac acting much like a carpet cleaner, the spray is going to get down into the fibers, down into the cracks and crevices of the carpet, and then vacuum it back up. So it's just physics. You would absolutely expect exactly what actually happens. So,
well, maybe you have an anecdote about the oldest cold case that this technology was utilized.
56 years is the oldest thus far, where it's actually generated a good profile. So I don't know what kind of cases it's been used on where it didn't produce a profile. I'm not really sure, how old they've tried it, but I know as far as actually helping solve a cold case, it's thus far it's 56 years.
Could you if you had any details that you could share those about that case a little bit, maybe a little brief?
Well, it's publicized,
okay.
and it's on our website. It was in upstate New York. I want to say Albany. I want to say it's a Albany area, and homicide. They had some clothing that they were trying to get a perpetrator DNA from, and they tried it and it worked.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'll check into that myself, being that it is highly publicized. Do you know how many jurisdictions actually employ this currently?
That is,
or maybe a better question, how many have you sold? It's kind of the same thing, right?
Well, actually, no. So in the US, there's about 150 systems, 140, 150. I'd have to go back and actually look. Probably 250 worldwide is all, which you would think with 18,000 law enforcement agencies just in the US, it would be a lot more. And so we got a lot of work to do. So but what has happened is we've sold systems to private labs around the country, and some agencies like the West Jordan PD that's here in Utah. They have a kind of broadcast, but especially the private labs, they've put out to every agency they can possibly reach that they have this new collection technology. And so based on that, they have helped hundreds and hundreds of agencies that have cold cases. But that agency, if it's a smaller agency, like, I don't know, it's probably out of the 18,000, I'll bet 12 or 13,000 of those are going to be so small. Some of these agencies, they might service a population of 20,000. Sure. They just don't have the budget for a system like the M-Vac. So,
and with a small population like that, you could probably borrow one from a neighboring jurisdiction, right? That's what I think a lot of law enforcement are in cooperation like that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So what'll happen, and I'll give you a perfect example. Broward County in South Florida, in the Fort Lauderdale area. So they purchased a system, and then they immediately started helping all the agencies that are in that county. And a lot of those agents, the bigger agencies, they've eventually purchased their own, but in the meantime, they were able to use the Broward County unit. So that happens all over the country. But even if they don't have a county, or like, Houston PD or somebody like that, that's really big, that's close by, they can always send their evidence to these private crime labs. Like a perfect example is Pure Gold Forensics in California. They've had a system for a couple of years, and I've worked with their DNA technical leader, Susanna Ryan, for years, and she's just absolutely amazing. She worked on some of the, I don't know if you remember the show Hunt for the Zodiac Killer. It was on the History Channel.
Maybe not that one specifically, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it only had one season, but there was a case. Sherry Jo Bates, I think, is the name of the victim in the LA area, and she was killed, I want to say, probably 3 or 4 years before the Zodiac killings up in the Bay Area started happening, and they thought that she might have been one of the very first Zodiac killer victims. So they tracked down some evidence in the Riverside County area, and this evidence had been sitting in a just a big warehouse. Hadn't even been air conditioned, so it had been sitting in this warehouse for 50 some years, and they M-Vac'd it, and they didn't get quite the results that they thought they might. And for example, the blood on there, which is going to be all of Sherry Jo Bates's blood, they didn't get anything. So that just shows you that over time, there's blood all over these pants, but they still, even swabbing it, couldn't get any kind of result. That just shows you that over time, the DNA itself is going to break down, and so you're not going to get a result. And those pants weren't stored properly. It wasn't in an air conditioned area, and Riverside, it's especially a warehouse, probably, who knows how hot it gets in there, 140, 150 degrees. So
I can see that there's a lot of room for discussion in this evidence collection, and maintenance of it is probably a whole nother issue we could talk on.
Oh yeah, it's really important. Yeah. It's, and who knows, back then, they, back in the, what was that, in the 60s and 70s, DNA wasn't even on the scene back then, so they didn't worry about it. And it's totally different now. I mean, if there's a homicide now, everything is stored in climate controlled, and it's the difference between even prior to like the 80s So DNA started coming onto the scene late 80s, early 90s is when it was kind of invented. I think the first time it was actually used at least in the United States, I think is like mid 90s. So prior to that, detectives and uh, evidence types, they didn't really, they weren't thinking DNA. They were thinking fingerprinting and just securing the evidence. So it didn't matter what the temperature was. But now, yeah, everything's different now.
That's great. I mean, that's really helpful for everybody. We want to keep the evidence secure until the cases have completely evaporated and there's no parties left available for an appeal or anything, right?
Well, even beyond that, I know there's a case, I believe it's in Tampa, where the suspect had died in prison for another murder, and they finally figured out that he was the one that did it. He'd been dead for 10 years. So solving the case is just as important, regardless of whether or not the perpetrator is still alive. It's just getting some kind of it. Victims and their families never really get closure. I think that's a word that's thrown around far too much. But just getting justice, I think, is important. And, knowing that case is actually solved, to me, that's really important.
I think a question to follow up to that directly would be, how many jurisdictions that have purchased this technology from you have not solved a case with it? I mean, and I know what you're going to say. They probably all have a story to tell you. So, I mean, as a in your jurisdiction, as a voter, your representative, you want this technology. I think you would want this, whatever. This seems to be one of the most important technologies in DNA today. Now, as we know, things change so fast. In 15 years, something new might come along and dwarf this. But for now, it would be my best opinion to say, we want to get this in as many jurisdictions as possible, to go through as many cold cases as possible and eliminate those cold cases, get closure or justice, as you said, for the victims and the victims' families. So I think it would be something to push for. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on and talk about this. One of the final questions that I would like to get to is, the name of the podcast is In Bad Faith. And so we're always kind of trying to look through the lens of what could someone in bad faith do with this, and how do we prevent that? And I don't know if you could comment a little bit about how the technology could be used in bad faith, and what would be a precaution to prevent that. I guess I'm just throwing that out there. If you're
No, when you send me those questions, I actually thought about this, and the M-Vac is just another tool, and I think there's a misperception about DNA as a whole out there, and it kind of goes hand in hand with fingerprinting, for example. If your DNA shows up at a crime scene, it doesn't necessarily mean that you were there when the crime was committed. And there's also something called transfer DNA, where you can shake somebody's hand and that person can go out and grab a baseball bat and beat his girlfriend to death with it, and your DNA may show up on that baseball bat. It doesn't happen very often, but it's possible. So everybody needs to understand that DNA is just another cog in the wheel. It's just one more piece of evidence. It's one more lead. It's one more way for the detectives to explore. But it doesn't necessarily, it's like, I can't say never, but I cannot, in my mind, think of a way that you would get convicted of a crime based solely on DNA. So to get back to your question, could the M-Vac be used or misused? It's possible, but with DNA only being, just one cog in the wheel. It still has to be corroborated in order to really be solid evidence against somebody in a crime. So, if your DNA shows up on a victim, is there a viable reason that your DNA might be there? Did you meet some girl in a bar or a nightclub or something, and then she went off and left the club with somebody else, and your DNA happens to be on her shirt, that kind of thing. It's just one of those where the M-Vac is going to collect more DNA than any other method that's out there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get convicted on it. Does that answer your question?
It does in a lot of ways. I think it puts the onus on the user. So what we could say is any tool could be used nefariously if they found a way to use it in such. So it's really not about, one of the previous interviews was about facial recognition technology, and we talked about how you could use that in a nefarious way, or other technologies that you could use in a nefarious way. And a lot of the times it does come back to the individual, and the responsibility to make sure that the technology is utilized properly lies on the individual using it. And so does that include some sort of oversight just to make sure that it's not one person collecting DNA, that there's 2 or 3 people always there, something like that? So I think you did answer it. I kind of agree with you. There's not a whole lot you could do to cheat the system, as long as there are, proper evidence collecting and forensics policies that are utilized throughout departments. It's just something I feel like I have to ask, right? So thank you so much for hitting that.
No, you can always go down those rabbit holes, and it doesn't matter what it is. Your car has a purpose to get you from point A to point B. Could that be used for nefarious purposes? Absolutely. Is it used very often? No. You don't see very many cases where people, plow into a crowd or something like that with a car. So and granted, the M-Vac is much more of a specific forensics tool, but it's still kind of the same concept, that there's so many checks and balances. And this is one of the things that I really, really love about the US justice system. Even for as many, backlogs, and on occasion, somebody will get convicted, wrongly convicted. The M-Vac's even been used to help free some people. And I'm fine with that. Absolutely. If that person is not guilty, there's no way they should be in prison. So, but it's so rare that happens, that when you look at the overall conviction rate and why certain people are convicted versus certain people are not guilty, and they're released, it's because there are so many checks and balances throughout the justice system. And that's what a defense lawyer is for. His job is honestly to make sure that the judge, the prosecuting attorney, and the investigators all did their jobs. And if they don't do their jobs properly, then the defendant should be released. Whether he's guilty or not, he should be released if it's not done properly. And most of the time they are. So yeah, there's rare exceptions, and I know some people love to really hone in on those rare exceptions and kind of blow them up and make them like they're the norm, but they're not. So the M-Vac, could it be used wrongly? Sure, but why would it? Because there's so many times when they have to account, like a crime scene investigator who's collecting evidence at the crime scene, and then might be using the M-Vac on some of that evidence. That CSI has to justify why they're using the system to begin with to their supervisors. And they have to, and it's pretty rare that a CSI is going to work just, they're the only person that's working a case. So, there's checks there. There's checks with their, their superiors within the agency. There's checks when, even if they do develop evidence and they take it to the prosecutor is going to then ask her questions, because the prosecutor has to answer to people too. And if the prosecutor moves cases forward that are frivolous, then the prosecutor is going to get dinged for that. And so, then they have to do it without a reasonable doubt. So, it just goes on. And I love it. The way that the whole system is set up, it's designed to protect the individual, you and I, against the system. Imagine if the federal government came down and said, Jeff, we're gonna, charge you with a crime. Well, the system is designed to protect you. And it's, yeah, again, there's bad examples of that, but for the most part,
there are flaws. Nothing's perfect, of course.
Right,
Yeah,
right. And even a perfect system, the moment you introduce people into it, it's imperfect. So,
right.
So yeah,
I think that comes back to it. It's a tool. There's checks and balances, but we're all human. Humans are, motivated by greed and revenge and all sorts of negative impulses that we have. And so, you're never going to eliminate it. I just hope that technologies like this move us closer to having less of those. Maybe it's 7% wrongful convictions, but this helps us, the tool, to get it a little lower. We really want to try our best to, I guess my only point about that is, they have that old saying, it's better to let 100 guilty men walk free than to have one man who's innocent in. And I don't think that we live up to that as much anymore. I think that has kind of degraded over the years. And prosecutors want to lock people up more and increase penalties because that looks good for their political funder. So there's a lot of intricacies in that. Can you tell me about your podcast, All Things Crime, that I can see in the background there?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I'd love to. So All Things Crime actually came about because of COVID. And it was interesting. I used to attend 12, 14 conferences a year. I mean, I was on the road all the time. And when COVID hit, all that was just nixed. It just all went to the wayside. Everything was canceled. We all found ourselves just sitting at home and, trying to send out emails and make phone calls and things like that. And that got old. And so I just started brainstorming and thinking about how I was going to reach the number of customers, to keep the funnel open. And so I started using Zoom, just like this platform. I started reaching out to some of the detectives and people that had a lot of experience with the M-Vac. I said, hey, I need to get some video material and stuff to post on LinkedIn. Is where I do the vast majority of my work. But we'll post on Facebook and other places, and even just send video directly out to some people. But LinkedIn is probably where I'm the most active. And so, if anybody wants to follow me there, that's send me a connection request. But what happened was I'd have this hour-long video, and I'd be taking little snips, 1 to 2, maybe 3-minute, sections of it and posting them on LinkedIn. And then somebody said, well, why don't you throw the whole thing up on YouTube and, just park it there, and then people can watch the whole interview if they want to see it. So I was like, okay. So I started a YouTube channel, and then I didn't want to do specifically under M-Vac systems, because we have a YouTube channel for M-Vac as well, but that's obviously exclusively the M-Vac. So when I'm talking just in general terms to a homicide detective, for example, and we're talking about how Like, for example, I did an interview with Cloyd Steiger, who served in the Seattle PD for, I don't know, 40 years. And he's written a couple books, and he's a really famous homicide detective, and he works on cold cases now all the time. Amazing guy. So I interviewed him, and our conversation was probably at least an hour. Well, you can't post something like that on LinkedIn. And so I started All Things Crime and just threw it up on YouTube. And then somebody had the idea of, well, just strip the audio out of it and throw it up on a podcast. So that's kind of how it got started. And now, okay. And so that was kind of the impetus of it. And then I also started talking to people about, there's a huge problem out there with people not really understanding the process of how a crime is actually solved, and all the way to conviction. And so, and some of the true crime podcasts that are out there, where they'll take like a specific case and really drill down deep into it. Some of them are really good, and some of them not so good. And it's obvious that some of them are doing it more for the drama than they are to actually explore the case and do justice for the victims. And so I wanted to also put out a product that helped explain to the layperson that, what the process is. So from the time that, the police officer arrives and secures the scene, all the way through to the prosecution. That's my goal, is to explain each of those steps and actually interview people that are part of each of those steps. And I don't know, I'm almost at 70 episodes now, and just having a great time. So that's kind of how the long-winded version of how All Things Crime got started.
Hey, that sounds great. Well, I will urge all my viewers to go ahead and check out All Things Crime. I will put the link in the description, as well as any other links related to maybe your LinkedIn page, or if someone's looking to contact you, we'll put your contact info in there. And I would look forward to maybe having you back again in the future. If you'd be interested in doing a live and field some real-time questions, that would be great. But as far as for today, I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to explain this. And I think it's going to be fruitful for a lot of people who are going to start to understand that, things are changing. We have new technologies out. People aren't quite aware of them yet, or in some cases just don't have the resources to get their hands on them. So that's something that's really important as we move forward and try to get more technology like this, getting cold cases and helping solve all things crime.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love it. And it's exciting to me. I get people sending me stuff all the time where a case is solved somewhere in their area, and it's a really old case, and the detectives are like, yeah, DNA helped solve this case. And a lot of times it's like the genealogical DNA, but if it has to do with standard DNA and it's a cold case, there's a really good chance that the M-Vac helped solve it.
That's really cool. So again, super excited to see you in the future, and good luck to you on All Things Crime and with the M-Vac systems. I'm sure this is going to generate a lot of questions. So yeah, anytime you feel you get one of those anecdotes about the M-Vac that has solved a crime, shoot it our way. We'll much appreciate that and try to support you in the future.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot, Jared. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Have a great day.
All right. You too. Bye.
Bye.